The dust from the wagon train still hung in the air when 17-year-old Emma Hartley realized she was completely alone. Cholera had taken her parents 3 days apart, buried in shallow graves somewhere along the Oregon Trail. The other families had moved on at dawn, unable to wait for a girl with no kin and no prospects. She stood at the edge of Salvation Creek, Montana territory, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring, a thin gold band that caught the harsh September sunlight. Her stomach hadn't seen food in 2 days. The general store loomed across the dusty street, its windows displaying jars of preserves and sacks of flour that might as well have been on the moon. Emma's fingers closed around the ring, feeling the warmth of the metal, the last piece of her mother's love. She'd have to sell it. There was no other choice. Before we continue with Emma's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Inside the store, the proprietor barely glanced at her before shaking his head. Can't give you more than $2 for that. Gold's thin as paper. $2 wouldn't last a week. Emma's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. She turned to leave and nearly collided with a wall of muscle and worn leather. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the doorway. His face was weathered by sun and wind, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But his eyes, pale blue like a winter sky, held something unexpected. Gentleness. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble. He glanced at the ring still clutched in her trembling hand. Then at her hollow cheeks and desperate eyes. Something shifted in his expression. "You looking for work?" Emma straightened her spine, summoning every scrap of dignity she had left. "I can work. I'm strong and I learn quick. I've got 300 acres that need tending. Lost my last hand to the goldfields." He pushed his hat back, revealing dark hair streaked with early silver, despite his apparent age of perhaps 32 or 33. "Name's Jacob Brennan. I run the Double B Ranch, about 5 miles north. Room and board, plus $30 a month. That ring stays on your finger where it belongs." Emma's throat tightened. I don't understand. Gold isn't what we need here. What we need is honest work, and it looks like you need a place to stand." He nodded toward the door. "You willing?" She should have been suspicious, should have questioned why a lone rancher would offer shelter to a strange girl. But something in Jacob Brennan's steady gaze told her he was a man of his word, and she was out of options. "Yes, sir, I'm willing." The Double B Ranch spread across a valley between 2 pine-covered ridges. The main house built of thick logs that had weathered to silver gray. A barn stood nearby, and beyond that, endless fields of wild grass waiting for harvest. Jacob's horse, a massive buckskin gelding, had carried them both. Emma perched behind the saddle, her arms carefully not quite touching the rancher's waist. He helped her down with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "Bunkhouse is there." He pointed to a small cabin. "You'll have it to yourself. I'm in the main house. You come up for meals, I'll expect you to cook." "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir. My mother taught me." Something flickered across his face at the mention of her mother, a pain that mirrored her own. "Supper's at 6. I'll show you the rest tomorrow." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Hartley, you're safe here. I need you to know that." She nodded, not trusting her voice. As he walked away, she noticed the stiffness in his left leg, the way he favored it slightly. A war wound, perhaps. So many men carried those scars now, 3 years after Appomattox. That night, Emma cooked the first meal she'd prepared in weeks. Venison stew, with wild onions and biscuits that were only slightly burned. Jacob ate in silence, but she caught him glancing at her between bites, his expression unreadable. "It's good," he finally said. "Been a long time since this house had a woman's cooking." "Your wife?" Emma asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "She died 4 years ago. Fever took her and our daughter both, 3 days apart." He said it matter-of-factly, but his knuckles whitened around his fork. This ranch was supposed to be for them, for a family. Emma understood grief that deep. It lived in her bones now. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Brennan." "Jacob. Just Jacob." He stood, clearing his plate. "Dawn comes early. I'll wake you at 5. The days fell into a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Emma rose before the sun, cooked breakfast, then followed Jacob into the fields. He was teaching her to work the land, how to recognize ready hay, how to handle the scythe without cutting herself, how to read the sky for coming weather. He was patient in a way that surprised her. When she struggled with the heavy tool, he came up behind her, his large hands covering hers on the handle. "Like this. Let the blade's weight do the work. You're fighting it." The heat of him at her back made her breath catch. He stepped away quickly, as if he'd felt it too. "Try again," he said, his voice rougher than before. She did, and this time the scythe sang through the grass in a clean arc. When she looked back at him, pride flickered in those pale eyes. "Good, you're a quick learner." But it wasn't just field work. Jacob seemed determined to make her self-sufficient. He taught her to ride his gentlest mare, a gray named Willow. He showed her how to shoot the old rifle he kept by the door, standing behind her to steady her aim, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. "Breathe out slow. Squeeze, don't pull." The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, but the tin can 20 yards away spun into the air. Emma whooped with delight, then immediately covered her mouth, embarrassed by her outburst. Jacob laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. It transformed his stern face into something younger, almost boyish. "Don't apologize for celebrating. You earned that shot." As the weeks passed, Emma began to see cracks in Jacob's armor. He had nightmares. She heard him sometimes, crying out in the darkness from the main house. One night, unable to bear it, she crept across the yard and knocked softly on his door. He answered in just his trousers, his chest bare and marked with old scars, a puckered bullet wound near his shoulder, long thin lines that spoke of blade work. His eyes were wild, still trapped in whatever hell his dreams had shown him. "Jacob," she said softly, "you're safe. You're home." He focused on her gradually, his breathing slowing. "Emma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I was already awake." "A lie, but a kind one. Would you like some tea? My mother used to make chamomile when I couldn't sleep." He nodded, and she moved past him into the kitchen she'd come to know as well as her own bunkhouse. As she prepared the tea, he pulled on a shirt and sat at the table, running his hands through his hair. "The war?" she asked quietly. "The war. The fever. All of it." He accepted the cup she offered. "Some nights I see Sarah's face when the fever had her. I couldn't save her, Emma. I couldn't save either of them." She sat across from him, her own cup warming her hands. I dream about my parents sometimes, about watching them get weaker, knowing there was nothing I could do. The helplessness is the worst part. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, something shifted between them. A recognition. Two wounded souls who understood the weight of loss. "You're not helpless anymore," he said. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Emma's throat tightened. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on." That's what strength is. Holding on when letting go would be easier. He reached across the table, and his calloused hand covered hers. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "Together, we're holding on. Together, we'll make it." That word, together, it echoed in her mind long after she returned to her bunkhouse, long after she should have been asleep. The harvest came in October, and with it, the first real test of their partnership. Jacob had hired 3 temporary hands to help bring in the hay, rough men who eyed Emma with varying degrees of interest and disrespect. Jacob made it clear from the start that she was off limits, but one man, a scarred brute named Dutch, didn't seem to care. "That's quite a prize you've got there, Brennan," Dutch said one afternoon, his eyes crawling over Emma as she carried water to the workers. "Awful pretty for a field hand." Jacob's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Miss Hartley is my partner, not a prize. You do well to remember that." Dutch smirked but said nothing more. Emma felt the tension crackling in the air, saw the protective fury in Jacob's stance. It stirred something in her chest, warm and frightening. That night, Dutch made his move. Emma was in the barn checking on Willow when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Dutch blocking the doorway, his smile predatory. "Thought maybe you and I could get to know each other better," he said, moving closer. "A girl like you, all alone out here with Brennan? You must get lonely." "Mr. Brennan treats me with respect," Emma said, her hand sliding toward the pitchfork leaning against the stall. "You should leave." "Maybe I don't want to leave." He grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. "Maybe I think you need a real man, too." He never finished the sentence. Jacob appeared from nowhere, his fist connecting with Dutch's jaw in a crack that echoed through the barn. The hired hand went down hard, and Jacob was on him in an instant, hauling him up by his shirt. "You touch her again, and I'll kill you," Jacob said, his voice deadly calm. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land, or I'll shoot you for trespassing. Your choice." Dutch scrambled away, blood streaming from his nose. Jacob watched him go, his chest heaving, then turned to Emma. His eyes scanned her frantically. "Did he hurt you?" "No, you stopped him." Her wrist throbbed where Dutch had grabbed her, but that pain was nothing compared to the fierce joy blooming in her chest. Jacob had protected her without hesitation, without question. He saw her wrist, saw the reddening marks forming there, and something broke in his expression. He reached for her hand with infinite gentleness, his thumb brushing over the bruises. "I'll die before I let anyone hurt you. Do you understand me?" The intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "Jacob, I made a promise to myself after Sarah died. No more connections. No more chances to lose someone I—" He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence hung between them like smoke. "But you walked into that general store, and I saw a woman worth saving, worth protecting, worth what?" Emma whispered. Instead of answering, he cupped her face with both hands, his palms rough and warm against her cheeks. "Tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me this is wrong, and I'll walk away." She should tell him to stop. She was 17. And he was more than a decade older. She was his employee, dependent on him for everything. But none of that mattered when he looked at her like she was the first sunrise after an endless night. "Don't stop," she breathed. He kissed her softly at first, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. When she rose on her toes to meet him instead, the kiss deepened, became something that burned away the loneliness they'd both carried for so long. His arms came around her, holding her like something precious, and she felt the thundering of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not a good bet, Emma. I'm broken in ways I don't even understand yet." "Then we'll be broken together," she said, echoing his words from that night in the kitchen. "Together, remember?" He smiled then, really smiled, and she saw the man he must have been before war and loss had carved away his softness. Together. But their peace was short-lived. 2 weeks later, a stranger rode up to the ranch just after dawn. Emma saw him from the kitchen window, a thin man in a dusty black suit, his eyes cold and calculating as a snake's. Jacob met him outside, and through the open window, Emma heard every word. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Cyrus Hartley. I'm looking for my niece." Emma's blood turned to ice. Uncle Cyrus, her father's brother, a man she'd only met twice, and both times had left her feeling dirty and afraid. Her father had refused to let him near their home, called him a devil in a human suit. "Don't know anyone by that name," Jacob said, his voice carefully neutral. "Emma Hartley, 17 years old. I have a legal claim to her as her only living relative." Cyrus pulled out papers from his jacket. "The wagon master said she was left in Salvation Creek. Store owner said she left with a rancher matching your description. What do you want with her?" Cyrus's smile made Emma's skin crawl even from a distance. "To take care of her, of course. A young girl shouldn't be alone in this wilderness. I have a friend in Laramie who's willing to marry her. A prosperous man. She'll want for nothing." Emma knew that lie. Her father had told her about Cyrus's friends, men who bought young wives like cattle, who worked them until they broke. She'd rather die than go with him. Jacob must have seen something in the papers, because his shoulders stiffened. "Those look legal enough. But the girl works for me. She's under my protection." "Protection?" Cyrus laughed. "Is that what you call it, when a grown man keeps a teenage girl on his isolated ranch? I wonder what the marshal in Salvation Creek would say about that." The threat was clear. Jacob could be arrested, his reputation destroyed, even if nothing improper had happened between them. And something had happened. That kiss in the barn, the growing feelings neither of them could deny. "You have 3 days to produce my niece, Mr. Brennan, or I'll return with the law." Cyrus tipped his hat mockingly and rode away. Emma waited until he was out of sight before rushing outside. Jacob's face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with helpless fury. "He can't take you," Jacob said. "I won't let him. He has the law on his side, and he'll use it to destroy you." Emma's mind raced. "I have to go. I can run, head to California, or—" "No." Jacob grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "You're not running. Not anymore. We fight this together." "How? He's family. He has papers." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he looked at her with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "We get married. Today. Right now. As your husband, I'd have legal authority over you. Not him. He couldn't touch you." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Jacob, you can't marry me just to save me from him. That's not— Is that the only reason? He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers. Because I'm pretty sure I'm falling in love with you, Emma Hartley. I'm pretty sure I started falling that first day when you stood in that store with nothing but your pride and your mother's ring. You've healed parts of me I thought were dead forever. So yeah, partly I want to marry you to protect you from that monster. But mostly, his voice dropped to a whisper. Mostly, I want to marry you because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. I love you too, but are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, I've never been more sure of anything. Not since Sarah, not since the war, not since anything. He wiped her tears with his thumbs. Marry me. Not as an employee, not as a convenience. Marry me as my partner, my equal, my love. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Jacob, together. They rode into Salvation Creek that afternoon, Jacob on his buckskin and Emma on Willow. The preacher was a kind-faced man named Reverend Walsh who'd known Jacob for years. He took one look at their joined hands and Emma's tear-stained face and asked no questions. Do you, Jacob Thomas Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Jacob's voice was steady as stone. And do you, Emma Louise Hartley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Emma looked up at the man who'd saved her from starvation, who'd taught her to be strong, who'd kissed her in a barn like she was something precious. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by Montana Territory and the Lord Almighty, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob kissed her softly, reverently, and Emma felt the world shift beneath her feet. She was no longer alone. She was no longer running. She was Emma Brennan now, and she had a home. They were back at the ranch when Cyrus returned the next morning. This time, with two rough-looking men flanking him. Emma stood beside Jacob on the porch, her hand in his. Wearing her mother's ring, alongside a simple gold band Jacob had bought from the general store. Miss Hartley, Cyrus called out, I've come to collect you. It's Mrs. Brennan now, Jacob said, his voice carrying across the yard. We were married yesterday. Emma is my wife. Legally and in the eyes of God. Your claim is void. Cyrus's face purpled with rage. You married her? She's 17? The law says 16 with parental consent, 17 without. She's of age, and she chose me. Jacob's hand tightened on Emma's. Now get off my land. This isn't over, Brennan. That girl is worth money to me, and I don't give up easily. Neither do I. Jacob's voice dropped to a deadly register. But I will give you one warning. If you or your men come near my wife again, I'll put you in the ground. And out here, the nearest law is 30 miles away. Plenty of places to bury a body. It was an idle threat. Emma could see it in the set of Jacob's shoulders, the cold fury in his eyes. He would kill to protect her. She should have been afraid of that intensity, but instead, she felt only a fierce gratitude. Cyrus must have seen the same thing, because he backed his horse up, his face twisted with impotent rage. She'll get tired of you, old man. She'll realize what she could have had. I doubt that, Emma said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was stronger than she'd expected. I have everything I need right here. They watched Cyrus and his men ride away. Jacob didn't relax until they were out of sight, and even then, he kept his rifle close for the next week, sleeping with one eye open. But Cyrus never returned. The threat of a violent death from a Civil War veteran apparently outweighed whatever profit he'd hoped to make from Emma's misery. As winter settled over the Double B Ranch, Emma and Jacob began their life together in earnest. The transition from employee to wife, from guardian to husband, had its awkward moments. The first night they shared a bed, Jacob had been so careful, so gentle, that Emma had to practically order him to touch her. "I'm your wife," she'd said, her face burning in the lamplight. "I want this. I want you. I don't want to hurt you," he'd whispered against her hair. "You won't. Go slow, and we'll learn together." And they had learned. Jacob had been patient with her innocence, teaching her the languages of bodies and desire with the same careful attention he'd used to teach her to shoot and ride. There was pain at first, but he'd been true to his word. He died before causing her real harm. And when the pain faded, there was only pleasure and closeness and the feeling of being utterly, completely known. The ranch prospered through the winter. With the harvest money, Jacob bought breeding stock and began planning expansions. Emma took over the books, proving to have a head for numbers that impressed her husband. "You're full of surprises," he said one night, watching her tally columns by lamplight. "Did you think you married a simpleton?" she teased. "I think I married a miracle." He pulled her into his lap, nuzzling her neck. "Best decision I ever made was walking into that store." "Second best," Emma corrected. "The best was saying, 'Gold isn't what we need here.'" He smiled against her skin. "Yeah, that was pretty good." Spring brought new life to the ranch and to Emma herself. She woke one morning in late April to overwhelming nausea and the sudden realization that her courses were 3 weeks late. Jacob found her crying in the kitchen, her hands pressed to her still flat stomach. "Emma, what's wrong?" He was at her side instantly, his hands framing her face. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm—" She looked up at him through her tears. "I think I'm with child." The color drained from his face. For a terrible moment, she thought he'd be angry or afraid. Then a smile broke across his features, like sunrise over mountains, bright and beautiful and full of hope. "A baby?" he whispered. "We're having a baby? Are you happy? I know after what happened with Sarah and your daughter." He kissed her quiet, his hands sliding down to cover hers on her stomach. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "but I'm also happier than I have any right to be. You and this child, you're my second chance, Emma. My chance to be the man I should have been all along." She gave birth in December, during the first snow, with Jacob holding her hand and the doctor from Salvation Creek talking her through each contraction. The pain was immense, white-hot and all-consuming, but when the baby's first cry split the air, Emma felt only joy. "A girl," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, red-faced bundle on Emma's chest. Healthy and loud. Jacob's eyes were wet as he looked at his daughter, his finger stroking her tiny hand. "She's perfect. You're perfect." They named her Sarah Grace. Sarah for the wife Jacob had lost, Grace for the second chance they'd both been given. Little Sarah had her father's pale blue eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she wrapped both her parents around her tiny fingers from the first moment. The Double B Ranch became a real home then. Emma's cooking filled the house with warmth and laughter. Jacob taught his daughter to ride before she could properly walk, sitting her in front of him on the buckskin's broad back. And on clear nights, the three of them would sit on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, wrapped in each other and in the knowledge that they'd found something precious. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked one such night, Sarah asleep between them. "Taking me in that day?" Jacob pulled her close, his arm heavy and warm across her shoulders. "Not for a single second. You were supposed to walk into that store, Emma. You were supposed to need help, and I was supposed to be there to give it." He kissed the top of her head. The rancher took in the orphan to work his fields, but she ended up healing his heart instead. Best trade I ever made. Emma tilted her face up to kiss him properly, tasting the future on his lips. A future they'd built together from nothing but determination and love. A future that stretched out before them like the Montana plains, wide and wild and full of promise. "Together," she murmured against his mouth. "Always together," he agreed. And under the vast western sky, with their daughter sleeping peacefully and the land they'd built spreading out around them, Jacob and Emma Brennan held each other close and believed in the possibility of healing, of love, and of second chances. Sarah Grace was 3 years old when the drought came. Emma stood at the kitchen window, watching the cloudless sky with growing dread. The fields that had been lush and green in spring now cracked under the merciless sun, the grass turning brown and brittle. The creek that gave salvation its name had dwindled to a muddy trickle. Jacob came in from the south pasture, his face grim beneath the dust that coated his hat and clothes. He'd aged well in their 4 years together. There were lines around his eyes now, and more silver threaded through his dark hair, but he was still the strongest man Emma had ever known. "We need to sell half the herd," he said without preamble, washing his hands in the basin. "There's not enough water or grass to sustain them through summer, let alone into fall." Emma's heart sank. They'd built that herd carefully, breeding quality cattle that commanded good prices. Selling now, when every rancher in Montana was desperate, would mean taking a loss they could barely afford. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough that we might lose the ranch if this doesn't break." He dried his hands, then pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "But we've survived worse, haven't we? Together, we'll figure this out." That word again, together. It had become their talisman, their promise to each other when times got hard. The next morning, Jacob rode out to negotiate sales with other ranchers and the fort 30 miles north. Emma threw herself into preserving what she could, making jam from the last of the wild berries, drying what vegetables remained in the garden, rationing the flour and sugar. Sarah, oblivious to the tension, played in the dusty yard with her rag doll. Emma watched her daughter through the window, fighting back tears. She'd grown up hungry and desperate, swearing that her own children would never know that fear. Now that promise seemed as fragile as the parched grass. That night, Jacob returned with barely enough money to cover 2 months of expenses. Emma saw the defeat in the set of his shoulders, the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes at dinner. After Sarah was asleep, Emma found him standing on the porch, staring out at the dying land. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his broad back. "We'll make it," she said firmly. "I didn't survive everything I survived just to let a drought beat us." He turned in her arms, and she saw the moisture in his eyes. "I'm supposed to protect you, to provide for you and Sarah. What kind of man can't even—" "You're the best man I know," Emma interrupted fiercely. "The kind who took in a starving orphan when he had no reason to. The kind who teaches his daughter to be brave and strong. The kind who loves me, even when I'm covered in flour and snapping at him over burnt biscuits." A small smile tugged at his lips. "You've only burned biscuits twice. See, I'm improving." She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "We have each other, Jacob. We have Sarah. Everything else we can rebuild. Together." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like a drowning man finding air. When they finally broke apart, some of the tension had left his shoulders. Together, he agreed. The drought stretched through July and into August. Other ranchers began abandoning their claims, heading west to Oregon or back east to families. Each week brought news of another foreclosure, another family broken by the relentless sun. Emma took in laundry and mending from the few families remaining in Salvation Creek, working late into the night by lamplight. Her fingers grew raw and calloused, but every dollar helped. Jacob hired himself out for construction work, helping rebuild a barn that had collapsed and working on a new church the town was building. They were exhausted, stretched thin, barely holding on. But they were holding on. Then, on a sweltering afternoon in late August, Emma saw riders approaching the ranch. 5 men, heavily armed, their horses' hooves raising dust devils in the dry earth. Her blood ran cold. "Jacob!" she called, scooping Sarah into her arms and backing toward the house. Jacob emerged from the barn, his rifle already in hand. Emma recognized the look on his face, the same cold calculation he'd worn when facing down Cyrus Hartley. He was a soldier again, assessing threats and angles of fire. The lead rider was a big man with a scarred face and eyes like chips of flint. He reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Name's Cal Murdoch," he said. "I represent Mr. Harrison Blackwell out of Helena. He's buying up land in this valley, and yours is the last piece he needs." "Not interested," Jacob said flatly. "Didn't ask if you were interested. Told you he's buying it." Murdoch's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You've got 2 weeks to accept his offer. $50 for the whole spread." Emma gasped. $50 wouldn't buy 2 milk cows, let alone 300 acres with buildings and equipment. It was robbery disguised as business. "The answer is no," Jacob said. "Get off my land." "See? That's where you're wrong." Murdoch leaned forward in his saddle. "This isn't your land anymore. Mr. Blackwell bought your mortgage from the bank last week. You've missed 2 payments. That makes this his property. He's being generous, offering you anything at all." Emma's world tilted. They had missed those payments, choosing to buy feed for the remaining livestock instead. She'd thought they could catch up once Jacob's construction work paid out. She'd never imagined the bank would sell their loan. "That's not legal," Jacob said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "It's perfectly legal. Got the papers right here if you want to see 'em." Murdoch patted his saddlebag. 2 weeks, Brennan. Then we come back with the marshal and an eviction notice. You can take the $50 or you can leave with nothing. Your choice." The riders turned and thundered away, leaving Jacob and Emma standing in the settling dust. Sarah whimpered in Emma's arms, sensing the fear radiating from her parents. Jacob's rifle clattered to the porch as his hands started shaking. Emma had never seen him like this. Not after nightmares. Not after facing down Cyrus. Never. He looked utterly, completely broken. "Jacob," she said softly, setting Sarah down and telling her to go play inside. Once their daughter was out of earshot, Emma took both of Jacob's hands in hers. "Look at me." He did, and the devastation in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. "I've lost it," he whispered. "Everything. The ranch Sarah and I were supposed to build. The home I promised you. The future for our daughter. I've lost it all." "No, you haven't." Emma's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You haven't lost me. You haven't lost Sarah. Those are the things that matter." How can you say that? I'm supposed to be your husband, your protector, and I can't even keep a roof over your head. Emma grabbed his face, forcing him to focus on her. Listen to me, Jacob Brennan. When I met you, I was starving and alone, about to sell my mother's ring just to eat. You gave me everything: work, safety, respect, love. You taught me to be strong. Well, now it's my turn to remind you. She pulled him down to sit on the porch steps beside her, her arms around his trembling shoulders. You are not defined by this land, she said firmly. You're defined by your courage, your kindness, your love for our family. We'll figure this out. Maybe we can't save the ranch, but we can save each other. That's what matters. That's what's always mattered. Jacob buried his face in her neck, and she felt hot tears against her skin. She held him while he broke, this strong man who'd carried so much for so long, and she vowed silently that she would be his strength now, the way he'd been hers. That night, after Sarah was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with their meager savings counted out in front of them. $37 and some change. Not nearly enough to buy back the mortgage, even if Blackwell was willing to sell, which he wouldn't be. We could go to Oregon, Jacob said quietly. Start over. The land's cheap there, and I can— No. Emma's voice was firm. We're not running. I didn't run from Cyrus, and I'm not running from this Blackwell character either. Emma, we don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Her mind was racing, turning over possibilities, discarding ideas as quickly as they formed. Then something clicked. The construction work you've been doing, the new church. They haven't paid you yet, have they? Not until it's finished. Another week, maybe two. And how much will they pay? $150. But that won't be enough to— What if we can stall Blackwell? Get that payment and use it to hire a lawyer. There has to be something illegal about what he's doing. Jacob looked at her with something like hope kindling in his eyes. You really think we can fight this? I think we have to try. For Sarah, for us, for every other family he's going to try this with if we don't stop him. She took his hands across the table. You asked me once what I was willing to do. I'm willing to fight, Jacob. Are you? His fingers tightened on hers, and she saw the soldier in him resurface, the man who'd survived a war and the loss of his first family, who'd built something from nothing once and could do it again. Yes, he said, I'm willing to fight. The next morning, Emma rode into Salvation Creek alone, leaving Jacob to watch Sarah and continue his construction work. She had a plan, risky and possibly foolish, but it was all she had. Reverend Walsh was overseeing the church construction when she arrived. He was a kind man in his 60s, his white hair bright in the harsh sunlight. Mrs. Brennan, he greeted her warmly. What brings you to town? Emma dismounted and got straight to the point. Reverend, my husband is about to lose our ranch to Harrison Blackwell. You've heard of him. The Reverend's expression darkened. I have. He's bought up half the valley in the past month, forcing families off land they've worked for years. It's unconscionable. Could you pay Jacob early for the construction work? We need that money to hire a lawyer, and we need it now. Reverend Walsh looked pained. Mrs. Brennan, I wish I could, but the church funds are held by the bank committee, and they won't release them until the work is complete and inspected. I'm sorry. Emma's heart sank, but she pressed on. Then can you tell me who else Blackwell has done this to? If we can prove a pattern of fraud, maybe a lawyer would take the case on contingency. The Reverend studied her for a long moment. You're a fighter, aren't you? Your husband is a lucky man. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket. I keep records of the families who've left. Talk to Samuel Chen. He runs the laundry. Blackwell tried the same thing with him, but Samuel's been documenting everything. If anyone can help you build a case, it's him. Emma found Samuel Chen in his steaming laundry, his arms deep in a wash basin. He was a small man, no taller than Emma herself, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. She explained her situation quickly. Samuel listened without interrupting, then dried his hands and pulled out a ledger from beneath his counter. Blackwell has done this to 17 families, Samuel said, flipping through pages covered in neat handwriting. The pattern is always the same. Buy the mortgage from the bank, claim a missed payment, offer pennies on the dollar for the land. Most people take the money and leave because they can't afford to fight. But it can't be legal, Emma protested. It's legal enough if no one challenges it in court, and Blackwell has expensive lawyers. Samuel looked at her with sympathy. I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan. I've been trying to find someone willing to fight, but everyone's too scared or too poor to risk it. Emma felt desperation rising in her throat. There has to be something we can do. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, there might be one option. It's not entirely proper, but it could work. Tell me. Blackwell will send his men back in 2 weeks with the marshal and eviction papers, yes? At Emma's nod, he continued, what if those papers got lost, delayed? It would buy you time. Maybe enough time for your husband to finish the church, get paid, and hire a lawyer. How would we delay official legal documents? Samuel smiled slightly. The marshal has to collect the papers from Blackwell's lawyer in Helena. Then ride them here. That's a 2-day journey. Things happen on the road. Horses go lame. Riders get lost. Papers get wet and illegible in a sudden rainstorm. Emma understood what he was suggesting. It was risky, possibly illegal itself, but it was also their only shot. If we did this, she said slowly, we'd need someone willing to complicate the marshal's journey. Someone with nothing to lose. I might know someone, Samuel said. There's a boy, Tom Running Deer. He's Blackfoot, about 16, been doing odd jobs around town. Smart kid, good with horses, knows every trail in these mountains. His family lost their land to Blackwell, too. He might be willing to help for the right price. How much? $10, maybe. Emma thought of their $37. Losing 10 would hurt, but not as much as losing everything. Can you arrange a meeting? 2 days later, Emma met Tom Running Deer at a clearing 3 miles from the ranch. He was lean and wiry, with eyes that held too much hardness for someone so young. Emma recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own reflection the day she'd walked into the general store with her mother's ring. She explained what she needed, someone to shadow the marshal when he left Helena, to create delays without causing actual harm, to buy them 2 extra weeks. Tom listened silently, then said, Blackwell's men killed my father, claimed he was trespassing on land they'd just stolen from us. Marshall didn't even investigate. His voice was flat, emotionless. I'll do it for free. No, Emma said firmly. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. You do this to help us, and we'll pay you fairly. $10. Something flickered in Tom's eyes. Respect, maybe, or surprise. He nodded once. When does the marshal leave Helena? In 12 days. I'll be ready. Emma rode home, feeling both lighter and heavier. She'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone. If they got caught, if Tom got caught, the consequences would be severe. But doing nothing meant watching Jacob lose everything he'd built, watching their family scatter to the winds. When she told Jacob that night what she'd arranged, she expected anger or fear. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You're terrifying sometimes," he murmured into her hair, "and I love you more than I can say." "Are you angry?" "No, I'm in awe." He pulled back to look at her. "You could have let me give up, could have accepted defeat. Instead, you're fighting for us harder than I ever fought for myself." "That's what you do when you love someone," Emma said simply. "You fight." The next 2 weeks crawled by in agonizing slowness. Jacob finished the church construction, and true to his word, Reverend Walsh had the payment ready. $150 in cash that felt like a fortune in Emma's hands. But they couldn't do anything with it yet. If they hired a lawyer before the marshal arrived with the eviction notice, Blackwell would know something was wrong. They had to wait, to hope that Tom Running Deer could buy them the time they needed. On the day the marshal was supposed to arrive, Emma paced the kitchen like a caged animal. Jacob kept watch from the porch, his rifle across his knees. Sarah playing quietly with her doll at his feet. Noon came and went. Then afternoon. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Emma dared to hope. Just before sunset, a single rider appeared on the horizon. Emma's heart leaped into her throat as she recognized Tom Running Deer's paint horse. The boy dismounted, looking exhausted, but triumphant. Marshall's horse went lame 20 miles out, had to walk back to Helena for a new mount. His papers got soaked crossing a stream, had to go back to the lawyer for new copies. "He won't arrive here for at least 3 more days, maybe 4. Emma could have kissed him. Instead, she pressed $15 into his hand, 5 more than they'd agreed. "You gave us a chance," she said. "Thank you." Tom looked at the money, then at Emma's determined face. "My father would have liked you. He always said the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who keep getting back up." He pocketed the money and swung back onto his horse. "Good luck, Mrs. Brennan. Make it count." That night, Emma and Jacob rode hard for Helena, leaving Sarah with Samuel Chen and his wife. They had 3 days to find a lawyer, present their case, and somehow stop Harrison Blackwell from stealing their land. Helena was bigger than Emma had imagined. Its streets crowded with miners, merchants, and railroad workers. They found a lawyer's office just as it was closing, a tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles sliding down his nose. "Mr. Sterling," Jacob said urgently, "we need help. Harrison Blackwell is trying to steal our ranch through mortgage fraud, and we have 3 days to stop him." The lawyer, whose name was Theodore Sterling, looked them up and down. "Do you have money for a retainer?" "We have $150, Emma said, "and documentation of 17 other families he's done this to." Sterling's eyebrows rose. He invited them inside, and for the next 2 hours, they laid out everything: the missed payments, the immediate sale of the mortgage, the inadequate buyout offer, Samuel Chen's meticulous records. When they finished, Sterling sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "This is fraud, no question. But Blackwell has the best lawyers in Montana on retainer. Taking this case could ruin me professionally if we lose." Emma's heart plummeted, but then Sterling smiled. "Good thing I've always wanted to take on Harrison Blackwell. The man's a cancer on this territory." He stood, extending his hand. "I'll take your case, and I won't charge you a dime beyond expenses. This is going to be fun. The next 3 days were a blur of legal filings, depositions, and emergency court hearings. Sterling proved to be a brilliant lawyer with a theatrical flair, presenting evidence of Blackwell's pattern of fraud with devastating precision. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Holbrook, listened to both sides with an impassive expression. Blackwell's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, argued that everything was legal, that the Brennans had defaulted on their loan fair and square. But Sterling had one more card to play. He discovered that the bank president who'd sold the Brennans' mortgage to Blackwell was Blackwell's brother-in-law. The sale hadn't been approved by the full bank board as required by law. It was a private deal that benefited both men. When Sterling presented this evidence, Judge Holbrook's expression finally changed. Her eyes narrowed, and she fixed Blackwell's lawyer with a look that could have frozen whiskey. "This court finds that the mortgage sale was fraudulent and void," she declared. "The Brennan Ranch will be returned to its rightful owners, and Mr. Blackwell will face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into all his land acquisitions in the past year." Emma grabbed Jacob's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd actually won. Outside the courthouse, Sterling shook their hands warmly. "You two are fighters. Don't ever lose that." "We won't," Emma promised. "Together, we never will." They collected Sarah from the Chens, who refused any payment for watching her, insisting that what Emma and Jacob had done would help the whole community. Then, they rode home to the Double B Ranch, arriving just as dawn broke over the eastern mountains. The land looked different now, not just their property, but their victory. Every fence post, every blade of grass, every building they'd fought to keep. Jacob swept Emma into his arms, spinning her around as Sarah squealed with delight. "We did it!" he laughed, joy transforming his face. "We actually did it!" "We did it!" Emma agreed, kissing him soundly. Together. That night, with Sarah asleep between them, Jacob pulled Emma close and whispered, "I never would have made it without you. You know that, right? You saved me just as much as I saved you that day in the store." Emma smiled in the darkness. "That's what love is, Jacob. Saving each other, over and over again in all the ways that matter." "Then I plan to spend the rest of my life saving you, Mrs. Brennan. And I plan to let you, Mr. Brennan. As long as we're together." "Always together," he promised. The years rolled by like a river, sometimes smooth, sometimes rough, but always moving forward. Sarah grew into a spirited girl, with her father's courage and her mother's determination. At 7, she could ride like she'd been born in the saddle. At 10, she could outshoot most of the ranch hands Jacob occasionally hired for roundup season. Emma watched her daughter grow with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. How different Sarah's childhood was from her own, full of love and security, never knowing true hunger or fear. That was exactly what Emma had wanted. Yet sometimes she worried that Sarah wouldn't understand the value of what they built. One afternoon in late spring, when Sarah was 11, Emma found her sitting by the creek, throwing pebbles into the water with unusual force. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" Emma asked, settling onto the bank beside her daughter. "Mary Ellen Thornton said her father says our ranch should have gone to Mr. Blackwell," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "She said you and Papa cheated, that you used legal tricks to steal land that wasn't yours. She said everybody knows it." Emma's jaw clenched. Harrison Blackwell had served 6 months in prison for his fraud, and when he'd been released, he'd started a quiet campaign to restore his reputation, which apparently included spreading lies about the families who defeated him. "Look at me, Sarah," Emma said firmly. When her daughter turned tear-bright eyes toward her, Emma continued, "Some people, when they lose, they learn from it. They become better. Other people, they just get bitter and try to tear down everyone else to make themselves feel bigger. Mr. Blackwell is the second kind. But what if people believe him? What if they think we're cheaters? Then those people don't know us." Emma put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "The truth is this. Your father and I nearly lost everything once. We didn't have money or power or fancy lawyers at first. What we had was each other and the determination to fight for what was right. We didn't cheat anyone. We stopped a cheat. Mary Ellen made it sound like you did something wrong. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy or popular. Sometimes it makes people angry because it forces them to look at ugly truths they'd rather ignore." Emma tucked a strand of hair behind Sarah's ear. "Your father took me in when I was an orphan with nothing. He gave me dignity and respect when he could have treated me like property. We built this ranch together, through drought and hardship and men who tried to take it from us. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Were you scared when you fought Mr. Blackwell?" "Terrified," Emma admitted. "But your father taught me something important. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway." "Is that why you and Papa always say together?" Emma smiled. "We say it because some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. When you share them with someone you love, someone you trust, they become bearable. Your father and I have faced a lot over the years, but we've never faced anything alone." Sarah leaned into her mother's embrace. "When I grow up, I want to be like you." Emma's throat tightened with emotion. "You already are, sweetheart. You've got your father's courage and your own fierce heart. You're going to do amazing things." That conversation stayed with Emma over the following years. As Sarah grew into adolescence and then young womanhood, Emma saw her daughter becoming exactly the kind of person she'd hoped. Strong, compassionate, willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. When Sarah was 15, a new family moved to Salvation Creek. The Johnsons recently arrived from Ohio with their 3 sons. The middle son, Daniel, was 17, tall and gangly, with an easy smile and kind eyes. Emma noticed immediately how Sarah's face lit up whenever the boy was mentioned. Jacob noticed too. One evening, he sat heavily at the kitchen table and said, "Our daughter's sweet on the Johnson boy." "I know," Emma said, kneading bread dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "She's too young for courting. She's the same age I was when I met you." Jacob's hands stilled on the coffee cup he'd been raising to his lips. "That was different, was it?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "I was 17, desperate, and you were a handsome stranger offering salvation. If anything, Sarah's in a better position to make smart choices. She has a home, a family, and time to get to know this boy properly." "I don't like it," Jacob muttered. Emma abandoned her dough and came to sit beside him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You're not losing her, Jacob. She's just growing up. It's what we wanted for her, a normal life where she can fall in love on her own terms, not because she's desperate or scared. What if he hurts her? Then she'll learn, and we'll be here to help her through it." Emma squeezed his hands. "Remember what you told me once? That I wasn't property, I was a person. Sarah is too. We raised her to make good choices. Now we have to trust her. Jacob sighed, the fight going out of him. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," Emma said, kissing his cheek. Over the next year, Sarah and Daniel's friendship deepened. He was a good boy, hard-working, respectful, and clearly besotted with Sarah. He asked Jacob's permission before courting her properly, a conversation that Jacob later admitted had involved more than a few veiled threats about what would happen if Daniel ever mistreated his daughter. Emma watched their courtship with bittersweet joy. She saw echoes of her own young love in the way Sarah blushed when Daniel smiled at her, in the way he looked at her like she hung the moon. But there was a lightness to their relationship that Emma had never experienced. No desperation, no survival, just two young people discovering love in all its awkward, beautiful glory. On Sarah's 17th birthday, Daniel proposed with a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. Sarah accepted, her eyes shining with tears of joy. The wedding was set for the following spring. Emma threw herself into preparations, sewing her daughter's wedding dress by hand, planning a reception that would feed half the territory. But as the wedding day approached, she found herself crying at odd moments, stirring soup, folding laundry, brushing out her daughter's long hair. "Mama, what's wrong?" Sarah asked one evening, finding Emma in tears over a pile of table linens. "Nothing's wrong," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "Everything's exactly right, and that's what's making me cry." "I don't understand." Emma pulled her daughter down to sit beside her. "When I was your age, I was alone and terrified, trading my mother's ring for food. I never imagined I'd have any of this: a home, a family, a daughter who's about to marry a good man because she wants to, not because she has to. You're everything I dreamed of and more than I dared hope for. You and Papa gave me all of this," Sarah said softly. "The safety, the love, the chance to choose my own path. I know what you sacrificed to build this life." "We didn't sacrifice anything," Emma corrected. "We fought for it. And every moment was worth it to see you standing here now, so strong and sure of yourself." The wedding took place on a perfect May morning, with wildflowers blooming across the ranch and the mountains standing proud against a cloudless sky. Sarah was radiant in her dress, and Daniel couldn't stop smiling as he pledged his life to hers. Jacob walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle they'd created in the yard, his eyes suspiciously bright. Emma heard him whisper to Sarah, "You deserve every happiness, little one. And if Daniel ever forgets that, you send him to me." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, more than all the stars in the sky." The reception lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, and more food than Emma had thought possible to prepare. As the celebration wound down and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their own homestead, a wedding gift from both families, Sarah pulled her parents aside. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for showing me what love looks like, what strength looks like, for building something worth protecting." Jacob pulled his daughter into a fierce hug, and Emma joined them, the three of them holding each other under the emerging stars. "You're going to do wonderful things," Emma whispered. "Just remember, together," Sarah finished, smiling. "Always together. You taught me that." After Sarah and Daniel rode away, Emma and Jacob stood in the yard, watching until the wagon disappeared into the darkness. The ranch felt suddenly quieter, emptier. An era had ended. "It's just us now," Jacob said softly, "like it was in the beginning." Emma leaned into his solid warmth, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. Not quite like the beginning. We were practically strangers then. Now I know every scar, every story, every secret you've ever told me. And you still love me? His tone was teasing, but she heard the real question underneath. More every day. She turned in his arms to face him. We built something beautiful, Jacob. Not just this ranch, but Sarah, our life, this love that's weathered everything thrown at it. He kissed her, soft and sweet. Best decision I ever made was walking into that general store. Best decision I ever made was saying yes when you offered me a chance. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the way they'd done 1,000 times before. Inside, the silence felt different. Not lonely, but peaceful, full of memories and promise. That night, lying in bed with Jacob's arms around her, Emma reflected on the path that had brought her here. From desperate orphan to wife, mother, fighter, survivor. Every hardship had been a stone in the foundation of the life they'd built. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob murmured sleepily. "How far we've come, how much we've survived." She rolled to face him in the darkness. "And how glad I am that I get to keep surviving it with you. For as long as we both shall live," he promised. "Together," she whispered. "Always together," he agreed. The years continued their steady march. Emma and Jacob settled into the rhythm of a ranch run by 2 people instead of 3. Jacob's hair went fully silver, and Emma found her own dark locks streaked with white. The lines on their faces deepened, maps of all the laughter and tears they'd shared. Sarah and Daniel had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl they named Emma Grace. The grandchildren brought new life to the Double B Ranch, their laughter echoing through the fields where Emma had once worked desperately to prove her worth. On Emma's 50th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Sarah had baked her mother's favorite cake, and the grandchildren had picked wildflowers that now overflowed from every available jar and vase. As the sun set and the children played tag in the yard, Sarah sat beside her mother on the porch, watching Jacob teach 6-year-old Emma Grace how to rope a fence post. "He's good with her," Sarah observed. "He's had practice," Emma said with a smile. "You were about her age when you decided you needed to learn everything there was to know about ranching in a single summer. I was determined. You still are. That's my favorite thing about you." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Ben said, "I'm pregnant again." Emma's breath caught. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "I'm 42. That's old for a baby. And the last birth was hard. Daniel's worried, though he's trying not to show it." Emma took her daughter's hand, feeling the calluses that came from hard work, the strength that came from living a full life. "You know what your father told me when I was pregnant with you? That he was terrified. He'd lost his first wife and daughter, and the thought of going through that again nearly broke him. But he also said that fear didn't mean saying no to love. It meant choosing to be brave enough to love anyway. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll face it together. You, Daniel, your father, me. All of us together, the way we've always done." Emma squeezed Sarah's hand. "But I have faith in you. You're the strongest person I know, and I say that as someone who's been pretty strong herself." Sarah laughed through tears. "Thank you, Mama." The pregnancy was indeed difficult. Sarah was bedridden for the last 2 months, and Emma moved into her daughter's home to help care for the other children and the household. It reminded her of those early days at the ranch, working from dawn to dusk, never quite sure if her effort would be enough. But it was enough. It had always been enough. When Sarah's labor began on a cold January morning, Emma sent Daniel for the doctor while she boiled water and prepared clean linens. The labor lasted 18 hours, and there were moments when Emma's faith wavered. When she saw the exhaustion and pain on her daughter's face and wondered if they'd asked too much of fate. But at dawn, a baby's cry split the air, strong and outraged and absolutely perfect. A boy, the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Sarah's chest. Healthy and already complaining, he'll fit right in with this family. Sarah looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face, then up at Emma. I want to name him Jacob, after Papa. Emma's vision blurred. He'll be honored. When Jacob arrived later that morning, having ridden through the night from the ranch, when he got word the baby had come, Emma led him to Sarah's bedside. His granddaughter was sleeping, exhausted but glowing, the baby bundled against her chest. A boy, Emma whispered, named after you. Jacob's weathered face crumpled, and he sank into the chair beside the bed, his large hand carefully touching the baby's tiny head. Jacob, he whispered. Hello, little man. Welcome to the family. Watching him with his grandson, Emma felt a profound sense of completion. They'd survived so much: poverty, drought, fraud, fear, loss. They'd fought for every inch of happiness, every moment of peace. And now, holding this new life, seeing the legacy they'd built spread into another generation, it all felt worth it. Every struggle, every scar, every tear, worth it. That evening, back at their ranch, Jacob pulled Emma onto the porch swing they'd installed years ago when their knees had gotten too creaky for sitting on hard steps. The stars wheeled overhead, brilliant and infinite. We did it, Jacob said softly. We built something that lasts. We did, Emma agreed. Not perfect, but real, strong, ours. I've been thinking, Jacob said slowly, about writing it all down, our story. So the grandchildren and their children know where they came from. Know what it took to build this. Emma considered this. It's not a pretty story. There's hunger and violence and near misses with disaster. But there's also love and courage and the truth that two broken people can fix each other if they're willing to try. He looked at her, his pale blue eyes still as intense as they'd been that first day in the general store. I want them to know that their grandmother was the bravest person I ever met, that she saved me in ways I'm still discovering. Then we'll write it, Emma decided. Together. Always together, Jacob agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, Emma's head on Jacob's shoulder, his arm around her waist. They'd sat like this 1,000 times over the years, watching the sun set on their land, on their life, on all the days they'd fought to have. Do you ever regret it? Emma asked suddenly. Taking me in that day? Your life would have been so much simpler without me. Jacob was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. Then he said, Emma, before you walked into that store, I was just existing, going through the motions, waiting to die so I could be with Sarah and our daughter again. You gave me a reason to live. You brought color back to a gray world. Regret you? I'd sooner regret breathing. Emma tilted her face up to kiss him, tasting salt and sweetness and 33 years of shared life. I love you, Jacob Brennan. I love you, Emma Brennan. I always will. They rocked gently on the swing, watching the stars emerge one by one. Each point of light, a memory, a moment, a piece of the story they'd written together. Emma was 63 when Jacob started slowing down. It wasn't dramatic, no single moment when everything changed, but gradual. He took longer to saddle his horse, needed more rest between chores. Sometimes his breath came short when he climbed the porch steps. Emma noticed, but she said nothing. Jacob was proud, and he'd never admit weakness unless forced to. She simply adjusted their routines, taking on more of the physical labor, finding excuses to do tasks Jacob had always done. One morning, in early fall, she woke to find his side of the bed empty. Panic flooded her. Had he collapsed? Had something happened in the night? She threw on her robe and ran through the house, finally finding him on the porch, watching the sun rise. "You scared me," she said, sinking into the chair beside him. "Sorry. Couldn't sleep." He reached for her hand without looking away from the mountains. "Emma, we need to talk about what happens when I'm gone." "Jacob, don't. Listen to me." Now he did turn to face her, and she saw the fear lurking behind his calm expression. "We both know I'm not going to live forever. And when I go, I need to know you'll be all right." "I won't be all right," Emma said fiercely. "How can I be all right without you?" "You'll survive. You've survived everything else." His grip tightened on her hand. "Promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll keep living, keep fighting. For Sarah, for the grandchildren, for yourself." "Jacob!" "Promise me, Emma." She wanted to refuse, wanted to rage against the future he was describing. But she saw the plea in his eyes, the need to know she'd be okay, and she couldn't deny him that comfort. "I promise," she whispered. "But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you'll fight, that you won't give up just because you're tired." "I'm not giving up. I'm just being realistic." "Realistic is one thing. Surrendering is another." Emma cupped his face, feeling the familiar stubble under her palms. "We've been fighting together for over 30 years, Jacob Brennan. Don't you dare stop now." A smile tugged at his lips. "Yes, ma'am." But promises couldn't stop time, or age, or the wearing down of a body that had endured war, hard labor, and 6 decades of living. That winter was harsh, and a cold that started in Jacob's chest refused to leave. The doctor came, looked grave, and prescribed rest and warm liquids, treatments they both knew were little more than comfort measures. Emma nursed him through the worst of it, sleeping in a chair by their bed so she'd wake if he needed anything. Sarah came to help, and together they kept vigil, reading to Jacob when he was awake, praying when he slept. On a clear February morning, with sun streaming through the bedroom window and Emma holding his hand, Jacob opened his eyes and smiled at her with perfect clarity. "Hey," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Hey yourself," Emma managed, her throat tight. "Remember that first day, when you tried to sell your mother's ring?" "I remember. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "I was right. You changed everything. Made everything better." "Jacob, don't. You're going to be fine. You just need to rest and—" "Emma." He said her name with such tenderness that her protests died. "It's okay. I'm not afraid." "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I don't know how to do this without you." "Yes, you do. You're the strongest person I've ever known." He lifted their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for loving me even when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved it," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. Always. Tell Sarah. Tell her I'm proud of her. Tell the grandchildren. Tell them their grandfather loved them. His breathing was becoming labored. And Emma, when your time comes, whenever that is, I'll be waiting. We'll be together again. Together, Emma choked out. Always together. Always, Jacob agreed. His eyes drifted closed, and his breathing slowed. Emma held his hand, feeling his pulse grow fainter, and when it finally stopped altogether, she felt something in her chest break clean through. Sarah found her there hours later, still holding Jacob's hand, staring at his peaceful face. Her daughter gently pried her fingers loose and pulled her into an embrace. "He's gone, Mama," Sarah whispered. "I know," Emma said, "but I'm not ready to let go." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to keep going, like he asked you to." The funeral was the largest Salvation Creek had ever seen. Families came from all over the territory, people whose land Jacob and Emma had helped save from Blackwell, people Jacob had worked for or with, people whose lives he'd touched in ways large and small. Emma stood by the grave in her black dress, Sarah on one side and Daniel on the other, and listened to Reverend Walsh talk about Jacob's life, his courage, his love. The words were kind and true, but they felt inadequate. How could anyone sum up a life like Jacob's in a few sentences? As they lowered the casket, Emma's hand went to the ring on her finger, her mother's wedding band, worn thin after all these years, beside the ring Jacob had given her. She remembered that day in the general store, desperate and alone. She remembered Jacob saying, "Gold isn't what we need here." He'd been right. Gold wasn't what they'd needed. They'd needed each other. And for 33 years, they'd had that. It wasn't long enough. It could never have been long enough. But it was real and precious and worth every moment of struggle. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered as the first shovel of dirt fell. "Until we're together again." The months after Jacob's death were the hardest of Emma's life, harder even than those days of hunger and desperation before she'd met him. At least then, she'd had hope. Now, hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She went through the motions of living. She cooked meals she didn't taste. She tended the ranch with Sarah and Daniel's help, though she couldn't remember why it mattered. She smiled at her grandchildren and pretended everything was fine, but at night, alone in the bed she'd shared with Jacob, she let herself break. It was little Emma Grace, now 8 years old, who finally pulled her back from the edge. The girl climbed into Emma's lap one afternoon and said, "Nana, are you going to die too?" The question, so blunt and terrified, shocked Emma out of her fog. "Not for a long time, sweetheart." "Promise? Because I don't want to lose you like we lost Grandpa." Emma looked into her granddaughter's eyes, Jacob's eyes, pale blue and worried, and remembered her promise. She'd sworn to keep living, keep fighting, not for herself, but for him, for the family they'd built, for all the people who still needed her. "I promise," Emma said firmly. "Your grandpa and I made each other a promise, a long time ago. We promised to always be there for each other. I can't be with him right now, but I can honor our promise by taking care of all of you." That's what he'd want. "Do you miss him?" "Every second of every day." Emma hugged the girl close. "But I also see him in you, and in your mama, and in this ranch he built. He's not really gone as long as we remember him." That conversation marked a turning point. Emma began to actively live again, not just exist. She finished writing the story she and Jacob had started, recording every detail of their life together. She taught her grandchildren to shoot and ride and stand up for what was right. She ran the ranch with quiet competence, proving that she'd never been just Jacob's wife. She'd always been his partner. On what would have been their 37th anniversary, Emma rode out to Jacob's grave. She'd had a proper headstone carved, simple but elegant. Jacob Thomas Brennan, 1836 to 1891, beloved husband, father, grandfather. Together always. She sat on the ground beside it, one hand resting on the sun-warmed stone. "I kept my promise," she said aloud. "I'm still fighting, still surviving. The ranch is doing well. Sarah and Daniel are taking over more of the day-to-day operations, but I'm not ready to fully retire yet. Little Jacob is 5 now, and already asking when he can learn to rope. Emma Grace is reading everything she can get her hands on. I think she's going to be a writer." A breeze rustled through the grass, and Emma closed her eyes, letting herself pretend it was Jacob's touch against her cheek. "I miss you," she continued. "Every morning when I wake up and you're not there. Every sunset we don't watch together. Every decision I make without your input. But I'm learning to carry it. The grief doesn't get smaller, but I get stronger. You taught me that." She pulled the folded papers from her pocket, the manuscript she'd finished. "I wrote our story, all of it. The hunger, the drought, Blackwell, everything. But mostly, I wrote about us. About how you saved me that day, and how I saved you right back. About how 2 broken people can heal each other if they're brave enough to try." Emma laid the papers on the grave, weighing them down with a smooth stone. "I'll have it published, not for fame or money, but so our great-great-grandchildren know where they came from, know what it takes to build something real and lasting. Know that love is worth fighting for, even when, especially when, it's hard." She stayed until the sun began to set, talking to Jacob about everything and nothing. When she finally stood to leave, her knees protesting the long sit, she felt lighter. Not happy, not yet, but less burdened. "I love you," she said to the headstone. "I'll love you until the day I die and every day after. We're not together right now, but we will be again. I believe that. I have to believe that." The ride back to the ranch took her through land she knew as well as her own face. Every hill, every tree, every bend in the creek. She'd lived here for nearly 4 decades, had seen this land through every season, every hardship. It was in her bones now, part of who she was. At the ranch house, lights glowed warm in the windows. Through the glass, Emma could see Sarah setting the table while her grandchildren ran around, chasing each other and laughing. Daniel was stoking the fire, and the whole scene looked like something out of a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was hers. She'd fought for it, bled for it, nearly lost it a dozen times, and Jacob had fought beside her every step of the way. Emma dismounted and took a moment to look at her home. Truly look at it. The house Jacob had built, the barn they'd repaired together, the fields they'd worked side by side, the life they'd created out of desperation and determination and love. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered to the wind. "We built something worth remembering." The wind answered with Jacob's words, echoing from memory. "Together we'll make it." And they had. They'd made it through everything: poverty, prejudice, fraud, drought, loss. They'd made a home, a family, a legacy that would outlast them both. Emma squared her shoulders and walked toward the house, toward her family, toward the future. She was 63 years old, widowed, and still fighting. But she was also loved, respected, and surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. As she reached the porch, young Jacob burst out the door. "Nana, come quick. Mama says you can tell us a story before dinner." Emma smiled, a real smile, the first in months. "A story? What kind of story?" "Adventure story, with cowboys and bad guys and everything?" "Well," Emma said, taking his hand and letting him pull her inside, "I might know a story like that. It's about a rancher who took in an orphan to work his fields, but she ended up healing his heart instead." "Is it true?" Emma looked around at her family, at Sarah's knowing smile, at the grandchildren gathering close, at the life she and Jacob had built from nothing. "Every word of it," she said. "Now come sit down, and I'll tell you all about how your grandfather and I met, and how we learned that together you can survive anything." And as she began the story, their story, Emma felt Jacob's presence like a hand on her shoulder, warm and solid and proud. They weren't physically together anymore, but they were still together in all the ways that mattered. In memory, in legacy, in the family they'd created, and the love that would never die. Together, always together. Even death couldn't break that promise. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Emma and Jacob's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.